Constantinople, 988. Someone has carved graffiti into the marble walls of the most expensive palace in the Christian world. Not in Greek, not in Latin, in Norse runes. This is either an act of cultural vandalism or the most expensive job perk in medieval history. Possibly both. The Byzantine emperor hired 6,000 of these men, trusted them with his life, paid them an absolutely obscene amount of gold, and they repaid him by defacing the architecture. This is the story of the Varangian Guard, the most chaotic, most expensive, most inexplicably reliable soldiers in the history of the Byzantine Empire. Nobody tells this story properly, presumably because it is quite difficult to explain with a straight face. To understand why Byzantium ended up employing 6,000 Viking mercenaries as personal bodyguards, you first need to understand what Byzantine palace life was actually like. The year is 963. Emperor Nikephoros II sits on the throne of Byzantium, richest Christian state on earth. He is not enjoying it. He knows he will not die peacefully. How does he know? Because he murdered the previous emperor to get the job. It is not paranoia, it is pattern recognition. He wears armor under his robes, tastes his food with a servant first, sleeps in a different room every night. His generals smile too much, his advisors bow too low. His wife, the widow of the man he killed, looks at him the way a cat watches a mouse it has not decided to eat yet. 969. He wakes up to find his wife's new lover standing over his bed with a sword. The lover is a general named John Simiskis. The sword goes through Nicephoro before he can scream. The entire court pretends this is a perfectly normal political transition. Because in Byzantium it is. Fast forward to 986. Emperor Basil II, 28 years old. He has personally watched 3 emperors get murdered, all by their own generals, all inside the palace. He cannot trust the Scholae Palatinae, the traditional Byzantine palace guard, because they helped kill the last emperor. He cannot trust his generals. He cannot trust his advisors. The primary cause of death for Byzantine emperors is employee relation. What Basil needs is someone with absolutely no stake in Byzantine politics whatsoever. Someone who does not speak Greek well enough to follow court intrigue. Someone whose loyalty can be purchased cleanly with gold and maintained with more gold. Someone large enough that assassination attempts become more of a personal inconvenience than a genuine threat. Where do you find 6,000 men like that? Basil looks north, very far north. Before we discuss what the Varangians did in Constantinople, we should briefly discuss what they were. Scandinavia in the 9th and 10th centuries is not really a geography. It is more of a psychological condition. These are people who looked at the open ocean and thought, that seems reasonable. Who resolved legal disputes by standing in a circle and hitting each other until someone stopped. Who named their children things like Thorir the Hound and Harald Bonebiter, and considered both perfectly sensible names for a human being. They did not ask whether something was a good idea. They asked whether there was gold there, and whether the fighting would be interesting. These were the 2 criteria. The journey from Scandinavia to Constantinople involved sailing to the Baltic, then down through Russia, then portaging their longships across land when the rivers ran the wrong way, then fighting through Slavic tribes who had not invited them, then navigating the Black Sea. They did out of this before they even had a job. They arrived in Constantinople carrying axes the size of small children, speaking a language nobody within 1,000 miles had ever heard, wearing enough chainmail to ballast a fishing vessel. The most sophisticated city in the Christian world had absolutely no framework for them whatsoever. Byzantine court ceremony required silence except when protocol dictated speech. The Varangians were constitutionally incapable of silence. They commented on everything in Norse, loudly during ceremonies, during imperial addresses, during moments specifically designated for reverent quiet. The court notaries occasionally recorded the disruption in the official record without explanation, because everyone present already knew perfectly well what it was. The Byzantine protocol had rituals for entering rooms, rituals for addressing the emperor, rituals for how to hold a wine cup at a state function. The Varangians treated all of this the way most people treat the terms and conditions on a software update. They clicked agree, and then did whatever they were going to do anyway. They drank constantly, communally, and with the kind of focused commitment usually reserved for religious observance. This was not, to be clear, because they were drunks. In Norse culture, drinking together was genuinely the most important social institution there was. It was how you formed alliances, resolved disputes, established trust, told stories. The Byzantines found this baffling. The Varangians found Byzantine sobriety equally baffling, possibly suspicious. They were not stupid. They were not savage. They were extraordinarily capable men operating according to a completely coherent set of rules. Rules which had simply never anticipated Constantinople, or any of its protocols, or anyone who thought a wine cup needed a ritual. 988. Vladimir of Kiev sends Basil 6,000 of these men. Basil places them between himself and everyone who wants him dead. It works immediately. The Varangians cannot be bribed by court rivals because they do not understand what is being offered. They cannot be turned by appeals to ambition because their ambition is entirely financial and already being met. They cannot be recruited into conspiracies because they cannot follow the Greek well enough to know a conspiracy is happening. The language barrier is not a bug, it is the entire feature. The contract also includes a clause allowing Varangian guardsmen to enter the imperial treasury whenever an emperor dies, and take as much gold as they can carry out with their bare hands. They called it palace pillaging. It was a formal written arrangement, agreed to by the emperor, which does mean the Varangians had a modest financial interest in imperial mortality, a detail nobody in the palace particularly enjoyed dwelling on. This tells you everything you need to know about how desperate Basil was. 990. A general named Bardas Phokas decides he would make a better emperor than Basil. He arrives with 20,000 soldiers to make his argument in person. He is expecting the usual Byzantine response to a military coup attempt: bribery, negotiation, carefully choreographed political theater in which everyone pretends to fight and then agrees on terms over dinner. He gets Vikings instead. Bardas Phokas has 20,000 men. The Varangians have considerably fewer. The Varangians find this ratio mildly interesting rather than alarming. They hit his army like a wall of extraordinarily motivated furniture. 20,000 becomes 15,000. 15,000 becomes 9,000. 9,000 becomes one afternoon. Bardas Phokas himself dies on the battlefield, not, it should be noted, from a Varangian axe. He has a stroke in full view of both armies at the precise moment of his greatest military ambition. His troops observe this and collectively decide they have pressing business elsewhere. A guardsman named Thorir the Hound reportedly asks if there is anything else that needs doing. There is not. He seems genuinely disappointed. The Varangians develop a reputation, several reputations in fact, magnificent in battle, completely ungovernable in peacetime, constitutionally incapable of walking past a wine supply without conducting a thorough investigation. The Byzantine chronicler Anna Komnene describes them as devoted to their emperor and their drinking in equal measure. At a state dinner for foreign ambassadors, Byzantine nobles arranged in precise hierarchical positions. Color-coded robes indicating exact rank, portions measured with genuine seriousness. The Varangians sit wherever they like, eat whatever is within reach, and at some point begin singing. 3 Byzantine courtiers end up unconscious. The ambassadors are uncertain what they have witnessed. The emperor pretends nothing unusual has occurred because, for him, nothing has. 1142. A Byzantine nobleman named Constantine Angelos walks into the throne room with a concealed dagger. He gets within reach of Emperor John II. He reaches for the blade. The axe comes down, and Constantine Angelos is dragged out alive. The emperor is unharmed. The Varangian goes back to his post. Here is the part nobody mentioned. The dynasty Constantine Angelo founds goes on to produce 3 Byzantine emperors, Those emperors make a sequence of decisions so catastrophically bad that they essentially invite the Fourth Crusade into Constantinople, hand the city to Latin crusaders who sack it thoroughly in 1204, and set the empire on the exact trajectory that ends with Ottoman cannons at the walls 250 years later. The Varangian who stopped that dagger may have saved the life of the man whose descendants ensured there would eventually be no empire left to guard. They stopped the assassin. They could not stop what he left behind. Nobody's perfect. Around this time, a young man arrives from Scandinavia who takes the Varangian reputation and makes it considerably more complicated. His name is Harald Sigurdsson. He fought at the Battle of Stiklestad as a teenager, watched his half-brother Olaf die there, fled Norway with nothing but an axe the sagas call Bone Biter, and a documented habit of charging enemy shield walls alone to see what would happen. The Varangians hire him on the spot. He fits. 1038. The Byzantine Empire launches a campaign to retake Sicily from Arab control. The general in charge is George Manieks, enormous, temperamentally unsuited to collaboration with other human beings. Harald is assigned to his forces. This is either an inspired pairing or a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. It is both. They take Messina. They take Syracuse. They cut through Arab fortifications that have held for decades. Maniakes provides the strategic framework. Harald provides the part where 500 men charge directly at whatever is in front of them, regardless of the numbers involved. The Byzantine soldiers attached to this campaign watch the Varangians operate and develop a haunted look that stays with them for years. The Sicily campaign also produces the incident that becomes known throughout the Byzantine army simply as the barbecue. Arab forces hold a fortress outside Palermo. The walls are thick enough that a conventional siege will take months. Harald looks at this situation and proposes a solution. They will cook meat outside the fortress walls at midnight. That is the plan. Just Vikings, roasting enormous quantities of meat in full view of the enemy in the middle of the night. The Arab soldiers on the walls watch this for quite some time. The wind shifts, the smell arrives. It is, by all accounts, extraordinary. Someone on the wall leans over to investigate. Harald waves, shouts something in Norse. Nobody understands it. He keeps cooking. The Arabs open a side gate to see if a trade negotiation might be possible. The fortress falls in 15 minutes. Not through superior tactics, not through engineering, not through any military principle that appears in any manual before or since. By 1043, Harald has spent nearly a decade with the Guard. He is rich, he is legendary. He has decided it is time to leave, not to retire to somewhere comfortable. To conquer Norway. Because apparently accumulating a personal fortune in the wealthiest city in Christendom while being paid to hit people is not quite enough for Harald Sigurdsson. He sails out of Constantinople with enough Byzantine gold to finance a civil war, which is precisely what he intends to do with it. What he does next. The kingdoms he takes, the battles he fights, the very large amount of history he makes. That is another story, and it deserves its own episode. But everything he knew about war, he learned here, in the Guard, carrying Bone Biter and not speaking Greek. After Harald, the empire begins its long and deeply reluctant decline. Incorrectly, empires never go quickly. They go the way a very large and expensive building subsides gradually, with everyone inside insisting it is probably fine. The Guard is still there, still showing up, still drinking, still absolutely not speaking Greek. But the numbers are changing. 6,000 becomes 3,000. 3,000 becomes 1,000. 1,000 becomes 50 men. 50 men, carrying ceremonial axes at ceremonies, standing guard outside a palace that is running out of things worth protecting, wearing armor that belonged to their grandfathers because there is no longer a budget for new equipment. The gold is gone. The treasury they were contractually permitted to raid once a year is empty. The contract still stands, and the Varangians are still there. April 1453. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II has brought 80,000 soldiers and the largest cannons ever constructed to the walls of Constantinople. He has been bombarding those walls for 7 weeks. The city has approximately 7,000 defenders, the Varangian Guard among them, what is left of it. The walls come down on the 29th of May. Ottoman soldiers pour through the breach. Emperor Constantine XI dies fighting in the street. The city falls. The last remnant of Rome, a civilization that had run continuously for over 1,000 years, ends on a Tuesday morning in the spring. But from 988 to 1453, 465 years, not one Varangian ever broke the contract. Not one staged a coup, not one sold his loyalty, not one walked away when the gold ran out and the walls came down. They were not loyal because they were noble. They were not loyal because they understood or particularly cared what Byzantium stood for. They were loyal because they said they would be. And these were not men who said one thing and did another. If you haven't already, subscribe.